So it's a beautiful sunny day here in Burgundy, and I'm actually thinking a little bit about Bordeaux because the Primeur tastings are wrapping up as we speak, and I've just published on the Wine Advocate our vintage report that my colleague Johan Castang and I have been working on for the last 3 weeks. It's a cathartic moment to get it off our chest because it's a huge amount of work, hundreds of chateau visits, revisits, thousands of kilometers on the road, and we're quite pleased to have published it, I have to say, and have it in the rearview mirror. But it's also a really exciting vintage to talk about, and I think one that I feel very passionate about because it's I think best understood as an amplifier. It's a vintage that amplifies the character of sites, of terroirs, of styles, and above all of winemaking choices. So it's not a classic great vintage in the 20th century sense of the term, which is these sort of vintages that are rising tides that raise all boats, if you like, where everybody makes great wine, even incompetent people. On the contrary, 2022 in Bordeaux is a vintage where it was possible to make fabulous wine, some of the most exciting wines of the last 20 years, at least in some cases, but also was very unforgiving of any kinds of mistakes. So you had to get everything right, and if you got everything right, all of that accumulated, and you made brilliant wines. And if you made the slightest mistake, whether it was something like de-leafing your vineyards prematurely, or extracting too aggressively, or picking your Merlot a little bit too late, things like that, you were punished very hard. In that sense, I think it's not a great vintage, as I say, in the historical sense of the term, but it's a great vintage in the what I think we're going to see more and more with climate change. We saw already a bit with 2020 that winemaking choices were perhaps a decisive factor in whether you made great wines rather than the vagaries of climate or whatever. 2022 even more so, and perhaps we're entering into a new sort of contemporary definition of what a great vintage is. I think the producers who then succeed the best, and naturally those with a contemporary vision. I think people who are both inspired by Bordeaux's past, by its heritage, committed to making these elegant, balanced wines, which is really the DNA of Bordeaux over the last 150 years, but also know that for the wines to stay the same, if you like, some things have to change. And that's mainly viticultural, but it's also technical. So I published also a big essay that's free to read about technical winemaking, viticultural changes in Bordeaux over the last 15 years. I was very glad I did when I was tasting the wines, because all of these points seem much more salient than ever before. And I think there are some fabulous wines. We're going to see how expensive they're going to be. I think they're going to be expensive because even if the economy is a little fragile at the moment, the Bordelais know that they have some special wines. They know that the quantities are rather low because of the extreme conditions, much lower yielding vintage in Bordeaux than Burgundy, incidentally. And I think the pricing is probably going to be a little ambitious. I hope that won't put people off. I think it's important, even if the top 25 or so wines are very expensive, it's important to look beyond that, look at the estates that are really pushing the boundaries agronomically with their farming and working very, very precisely in wineries. And you can still find things in Bordeaux that are incredibly cheap compared to what even just generic Bourgogne Rouge costs from good producers in the Côte d'Or these days. So I hope it'll be a vintage that draws maybe my generation into Bordeaux a little bit, and I think it's great that in many ways it's great that it's a vintage that foregrounds the importance of farming and of choices and of styles, because this is something that the Bordeaux has been sort of fermenting for the last 15 years, and people have instead not been necessarily talking enough about it. You know, one of the problems in Bordeaux sometimes is the people presenting the wines in the market and not the people who made them. But when you actually have contact with the people who are making the wines, it's such a dynamic place, and really the people who've been doing all this work, putting the hours in, paid off big time in 2022, and the people who are falling behind suffered a little bit. So anyway, I'm sure that I think normally the site is having some difficulties loading at the moment, but I hope once the dust settles, anyone who's interested signs up and reads the report, and then the big essay about Bordeaux farming for anyone who wants to go into that is free for read on our site at the Wine Advocate as well.